Our WNST road trips to Green Bay, Nashville, as well as Minnesota and London are all on. This guy's been to all those places, but he spends most of his time down there in Mobile, Alabama, where he is the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. He's with ESPN Insiders. You saw him on TV on Monday and Tuesday. You'll see him all weekend. He'll be doing Philadelphia draft stuff at ESPN as well as Sirius XM. And he is my lifer pal, and all crimson tied it up down there in Alabama. We welcome Senior Bowl Phil on Twitter and my friend Phil Savage back on the eve of the draft. Phil, I'm going to ask you in my best Baltimore accent, who the Ravens taking?
Well, good afternoon, Nestor. It's that time of year, the culmination of about 11 months worth of work for these 32 clubs that are out there, including the Baltimore Ravens, and it all comes to a close Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then it all starts anew with players for the rosters for 2017, and then the scouts will go back to work and begin on 2018. But the Ravens are in a good spot, I think, this year at pick number 16. This is a draft that's got a lot of mixed feelings about the players at the top, because there's just a handful that are actually clean, height, weight, speed-wise, character-wise, medically. And I think the Ravens are going to have their there'll be at least one receiver there, if not two, that they like. I think that there would be a cornerback there or two that they would be interested in. Pass rush, we'll see where that shakes out. They may end up trying to move down to get in more of a position to take one that, in terms of it being commensurate with his ability. But nevertheless, I think they're in a pretty good spot, because there's not a lot of difference between the 10th player and the 60th player this year.
Phil, you've done this a long, long time, going back to all those drafts with, John Ogden and Ray Lewis. And in the modern era, you can really get paralyzed by this, right? I mean, back in our era, there was you and Eric telling me what you felt like telling me. There was Kuiper and Bushbaum and our lads, and that's about it, right? Now everyone's an expert. Everyone has tape or lies about tape or has access to tape on the internet, and you've done this professionally all your life. Ozzie always says, we put on the tape and see how they play. And I know as the executive director of the Senior Bowl, you're trying to sort of undo that, right? You're trying to add the chair. You almost act as an agent to some degree, as does the Combine, to help the kids who maybe their tape wasn't as good, or maybe their system wasn't as good, or maybe their team it wasn't as good, that you like to see these guys climb to some degree, but maybe as the talent evaluator when you're running the Browns or drafting for the Ravens, maybe some of that's a little bit fool's gold. And I think that's the hardest part, is when I hear guys climbing the board, I wonder what they've done since the last time they played football at whatever bowl they were in back in January or December.
Yeah, I think you really have to lean on what you saw during the season, whether it was in a practice, in a game, live exposure, and then the tapes that you actually watched from the prospect season. I think the other thing that happens too, Nestor, is that once the coaches get involved after the regular season ends, they began to see some of the players here at the Reese's Senior Bowl and at the Combine and go to pro days. They may have a little different viewpoint of a given prospect, and that inevitably is one of the driving forces of why a player is on the move up or perhaps on the way down a given draft board. But the reality is that I do think you go back to what your initial impression was in the fall. I know that we always tried to monitor if a player was gaining too much momentum. It was like, hey, we need to hold our horses here a little bit. And then if a player was sinking too much, we said, wait a minute. Back in September, October, we thought this guy was a good fit for us, and now all of a sudden, he's way down the board. So let's not lose track of him. So I think it just depends on the philosophy and who's sort of guiding the ship. And I think if it's a coach-driven organization, you have more fluctuation in the spring with the players. If it's a GM or personnel-driven organization, there's probably not as much movement.
Phil Savage joining us here. You, of course, can follow him out on Twitter, and hundreds of thousands do at Senior Bowl Phil. All right, so for the Ravens and their needs, Phil, I spent December watching the team sort of implode and fall, out of the playoffs, and I know there was one play in Pittsburgh on Christmas Day that changed a lot of things, but I still think Jimmy Smith and losing a corner once again, the back end of the secondary is a problem, and I thought all along they need a corner. I thought all along they need a rush edge, and over the last 60 to 90 days, let's say since the Combine, everything's been about the right tackle and about the center and about the running back and about the tight end from Alabama and about these wide receivers that you don't have a $25 million quarterback and not get him help. As bad as the offense has been at various points, and I know Steve Smith's gone and they still really don't have a running back. They have a committee and they have one kid that's going to be missing the first month of the year for off-season violations. I find it hard to believe that they're going to go offensive line with the defensive issues that they have at this point, but I know the depth is there at rush edge, and I know the depth is there at corner, that there is a thought, well, they can get that on Friday.
Yeah, this is not a really strong draft for the offensive line. I would think if they sit there at 16, the only lineman they could conceivably take there really would be Forrest Lamp from Western Kentucky in my mind. Now, you can argue that Cam Robinson could go there from Alabama, but he looks like a first-rounder, Nestor. Didn't necessarily play like one this past year for the Tide, albeit the Tide was 14-1. He was a big part of that, but he also was part of some of the struggles they had on the offensive line and working with a freshman quarterback. But that's neither here nor there. I tend to think that you're always better off going defense because it's a throwing league. You never have enough cover people. You never have enough rushers, and those are two areas that the Ravens could use some help going into this next season. And invariably, if you're better on defense, then it might help your offense because you're going to create more turnovers. Maybe you create more of a shorter field for Joe Flacco and company. But the receiving group, Mike Williams and Corey Davis, they both could be there. They both could be gone by then. The reality of it is that in the era of the spread offense in college football, there are going to be receivers to take in the second and third round. So I just tend to think that you lean more towards defense this year rather than the offensive line because I just personally don't think this is a very strong class up front.
Well, with the wide receivers, I think all of us cringe. And I don't just cringe because of Travis Taylor and Brashad Perry. I cringe because of all the wide receivers in the first round with every team and every organization over, 22 drafts now, going back to the beginning of our friendship over at the Pikesville Hilton in 1996. Drafting wide receivers is the biggest crapshoot there is along the line, and I think we found that out with Perryman 2 years ago. That's not to say that you shouldn't have one or you don't want one, but it does make me nervous at 16 taking a wide receiver.
Yeah, historically it's not been a kind position for the Ravens through the years for whatever reason, and it's somewhat surprising, but when you go back through the names, none of them have really lived up to the billing that they had coming into the league as a first-round draft choice. But I think part of it is just, I mentioned the spread offenses in college. A lot of these kids line up on the left outside, and they run their outs to the left and their in cuts to the right. Other kids line up as a slot inside receiver on the right, and that's the only position they play. And I think that it does take a little time for those players to make an adjustment to the NFL. Oftentimes they don't have the time to do that. They're thrown into the fire. And in a division where the Pittsburgh Steelers live and the Cincinnati Bengals, it's not always going to be easy.
Phil, for you with the wide receiver thing, O.J. Howard's the one sort of X factor in all of this for an offense. I have seen him mocked to the Ravens as low as 16. In most drafts, he's gone before there. No one would know more about O.J. Howard than you, except maybe Ozzie, right, out of Alabama. First off, do you think he'll be there? And is he a guy you would put the gold star on and say he is that difference maker, that Gronkowski, that Shockey, that guy that's going to come in for the next 3 to 5 years and really create mismatches and framework of offenses?
Yeah, I think there's zero chance that he'll be there at 16. This is a prototype, 6'6", 250-plus pounds, ran 4.5 at the combine, was a consistent player at Alabama, albeit didn't get a ton of opportunities because last year Jalen Hurts was the quarterback. They just did not trust him to throw the ball between the hash marks, and that's where O.J. Howard as a tight end would be operating most of the time. So he showed up down here at the Reese's Senior Bowl, did well, performed at the Combine extremely well. He's a first-class individual. He's one of those 10 to 12 clean prospects that are available this year, and that's why I just don't think that there's a snowball's chance that he would be available at 16.
Who do you call the 10 or 12 clean? I love when you say that because you were one of those guys that had to put your name to it. And, with guys having problems off the field, we're hearing about this incident in Cleveland in the overnight leading up to Thursday that may cost this kid from Ohio State his future. We had the bong video that surfaced at 7 o'clock last year on draft night for a kid that the Ravens might have been looking at, went another direction, had an opportunity to pick. And then there's the Joe Mixons, right? I mean, that is a factor. I mean, we talked about it in your era, and I think a lot of teams look the other way and say, well, if the kid can get there on Sunday and play, Lawrence Taylor had problems, but he went to the Hall of Fame. I think we're in a different era now, and I think a lot of owners feel differently about this, as do football people. Give me the 10 or 12 clean guys in your mind. Name some guys that you would sign up for right now to have on your football team.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why Myles Garrett will go number one overall. It's not necessarily because he's the best football player today, but it's because he's the most talented prospect in this draft at 6'5", 270, 40-inch vertical, sub 4.6 in the 40. I mean, you're going to bet that, hey, your coaching staff can make a player out of this guy and that his best football is ahead of him. But Jamal Adams from LSU, the safety, 3-year starter. His measurables are all good with the exception of his vertical jump, which some people would say, well, that doesn't, that means he's not clean, but I'm going to give him a pass on that. Jonathan Allen is about as clean of defensive lineman as you're going to find, although there are some arthritic changes in his shoulder, so he's not pristine in that way. But Nestor, you look at these other guys. Marshawn Lattimore, 2 years of hamstring problems at Ohio State, 1-year starter. Malik Hooker, Ohio State, 1-year starter. He went through 2 surgeries in the offseason. He's untested this entire spring. Corey Davis, receiver from Western Michigan, ankle surgery at the end of January, untested throughout the spring. He should be ready by training camp. Reuben Foster, now he's got a diluted sample. He also had a shoulder surgery. He won't be ready for training camp. He's been on the shelf the entire spring. That's what I mean. When you really start to look at this draft, there's really only a handful of players that you would consider clean. Christian McCaffrey would be one. You can point to his size. He's not ideally suited at 5'10", 205, but he's not being drafted to be a bell cow. He's going to be drafted to be a part-time runner, full-time receiver out of the backfield, and a full-time returner. So there's going to be ways to get him the football without just turning and handing it to him in the backfield as an I-formation runner.
What about the running back position? I mean, that thing there has been devalued over the last 15, 20 years, and yet, the Gurleys and I guess the Zeke Elliott's have sort of brought this back, and for teams that can't run the football, and we're one of them here in Baltimore, Phil, the question would be, do you spend that money on the line, or do you try to get a special guy in the backfield? The Ravens will certainly have an opportunity at 16 to take care of that if they wish to do so.
Yeah, I think in this particular draft, Leonard Fournette from LSU and Christian McCaffrey, from everything that I see and hear, both of those guys would be off the board at 16. I don't think the Ravens would take Dalvin Cook at that point. I guess they could conceivably do it, but I'm of the mindset that you can find a running back in almost every round of the draft now to at least be a piece of your backfield puzzle. He may not be the lead pony. He may not be a third down specialist, but he's going to be able to give you something as part of the fabric of your backfield. Of course, the Ravens almost have that now with multiple candidates that could be a part of the program in 2017. So, again, when if you shy away from the O-line at 16, you shy away from the running back, to me that leads you to either receiver on offense or something on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's where the Ravens will ultimately go. And, you're always going to say that, hey, we took the best player available. But what people lose sight of is throughout the last several months is the Ravens and other clubs have been meeting. In a lot of respects, they set the board towards some of the needs that they have. And so typically when they do turn that player's name in, he is the best player on the board because he's already been sort of put in that position throughout all the meetings leading up to draft night.
Hassan Reddick is a name that I hear a lot about, maybe not to the Ravens, but I have seen him mocked to the Ravens. But one of those guys that maybe began as a second-round guy 2-3 months ago, now is almost universally thought of as a first-round guy and a first-half guy in some mock drafts as well. He has been a name that's been a real riser.
Yeah, Nestor, he would be one of the faces of the franchise as it relates to our event, the Reese's Senior Bowl down here, because he arrived as an undersized defensive end from Temple that most saw as probably a third-round choice before he came to Mobile. We convinced him that he should try to play linebacker, that I personally thought that was his position. He agreed to do it, and he's elevated. Of the 120 players that were on our two rosters this winter, he's the player that has elevated his draft stock the most. I think it's conceivable he could be there at 16 for Baltimore. I would see him as a right outside linebacker in their 3-4, or even as a will in their 3-4, but that puts him in the same position as C.J. Mosley. So I would see him as more of a right outside backer, pass rush kind of guy in their scheme with the versatility to play coverage or rush the passer on third down. He'd be an interesting call for Baltimore because he definitely fits the profile of having speed, toughness, and instincts. And that was the triangle, so to speak, that we always looked for when we took a defensive player. We didn't worry so much about his height or weight, although that was important. But in reality, we worried about whether they could run, whether they would hit, and could they actually find the football.
Phil Savage joining us here. He, of course, is Senior Bowl Phil and the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. I like my chocolate dark, Phil. You know that. I don't want that milk chocolate. Make sure you're sending me the dark chocolate peanut butter cups when you send them up here. The quarterbacks. 3 months ago, none of these guys were franchise guys. Now 3 or 4 teams are talking about 4 or 5 guys being franchise guys. Phil, if nothing else on Thursday night, I think this draft, and I know ESPN and the NFL Network and you guys that cover it would all say the same thing. It is reality television. Anything can happen, from a gas mask bong to a team not getting its card in to surprises. But the trade part for me on Thursday night, because of how many teams need a quarterback and because there's no consistent evaluation on any of these quarterbacks anywhere, I don't believe. And someone's going to take Trubisky. Someone's going to take Deshaun Watson and Kaiser. Someone's going to take the kid out of Texas A&M or Texas Tech. The thoughts for where those guys might go, I don't think anybody could analyze it, but I know it's going to involve trades, Phil. That much I know, and I know Ozzie likes to trade, and for that reason, there could be 5, 6, 7 trades in the first round before it's all over with, I think.
Yeah, this is a very mediocre quarterback class overall. Every one of these quarterback prospects, I mean every one of them, from Mitchell Trubisky to Deshaun Watson all the way down to Josh Dobbs at Tennessee and Brad Kaya from Miami, they all need a degree, if not more, of incubation time. The problem is that this league's not a developmental league anymore. And if you take one of these quarterbacks in the first round, inevitably he's going to be on the field sooner rather than later. And so with that being said, I favor Deshaun Watson over the others because he's just got more experience. He's been on the biggest of stages. He's handled the media. He's got a desire to be a good quarterback in the NFL. So I trust him more than these other guys. My forecast is I think one quarterback will go in the top 10. It's likely to be Mitchell Trubisky. Then I think Deshaun Watson will come off the board somewhere in that 10 to 25 range. And then I think you're going to have one more developmental try in the bottom of the first round. Somebody will slide in there, or maybe Pittsburgh or Kansas City will take a flyer on a Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Kaiser or maybe even a Davis Webb from Cal. So my over-under is 3 quarterbacks. Then I think you'll see a rush of them in the second and third round. I think the teams, when push comes to shove, they're going to opt to take a position player that can help them this year. And then if we're interested in a quarterback, let's wait and take one in the second or third round.
Phil Savage joining us here. Last question. This is my stock question for everyone. Give me your gold star, Savage. Who's the player you love in the draft that isn't Myles Garrett at the top or Jamal Adams? Give me a player that's going to go somewhere between 20 and 40 that you really like.
My red star player, I think, would be Jordan Willis. He's a defensive end from Kansas State. He was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, which in that league probably doesn't say a lot because they don't play much defense, but he plays hard every snap. He showed up at the Senior Bowl here, was the MOP of the South team, had 2 strip sacks in the game. Then he goes to Combine, and where people thought he was going to lose some of his momentum, he actually elevated because he measured in at 6'4", 255, ran 4.53, jumped 39 inches. I mean, honestly, I think that guys like Taco Charlton and Derek Barnett, one from Michigan, the other from Tennessee, are going to go higher than Willis. I would take Willis above those guys every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Do you think he goes into the first round or no?
I think he's got a chance to be a surprise first rounder in the bottom third of the first round. I know that his favorite player and a prospect that he enjoys watching is Cameron Wake. The Dolphins are in somewhat of a need for a defensive end, so I would bet that he's on their list. Maybe not at 22, but if they slide back, perhaps. But look, the Cowboys at 28 would be an ideal fit for him. They need pass rush, they need temperament, and Jordan Willis brings both of those things.
See, this is why I love you, Phil. 20 years later, you can still call me on the phone and tell me how you really feel about things, and you don't have to lie to me anymore. I mean, if you were still running a team right now, you wouldn't give me Jordan Willis to save my life. Hey, man.
You got that right.
How's life for you?
They paid me a lot more money to keep those secrets then than I'm getting paid now, so I'm getting paid to tell all this kind of stuff.
Well, I tell you, man, you're running around. This is a busy, busy week, and make a little pitch for the people here who have kids or families who love the NFL. I mean, you've been to a million Super Bowls like me and combines and all of this stuff. This draft thing that they're building up in Philadelphia, this might be the only time it's around here for a number of years. Clearly, they're going to have it in L.A. Clearly, they're going to have it in Vegas once that they're going to be doing this thing. But it is sort of the winter Super Bowl and the Carnival. It's really an amazing opportunity, I think, for people here locally. And Coach Billick raves about it in Chicago as well, that they've made this thing a hell of a party, and it's an hour and a half away.
Yeah, they really have. And, of course, they're going to have an incredible layout there in Philadelphia. And it is very fan-friendly. I know in Chicago the last few years it was just amazing what they did there. Of course, the weather was really bad last year. The year before was awesome weather. I think they're calling for very hot temperatures, like in the 80s. So I think people, if you took the time to take the train up or drive your own car, it would be worth the trip because it's different than going to a game. There's a lot of interactive activities, NFL experience. There's a ton of current and former players that are around, that are available to the fans, and, of course, the excitement of actually seeing the players get picked and where they're going. There's really nothing like it. It really symbolizes the start of the 2017 season because now it becomes reality in terms of who is actually going to be wearing your team's jersey and who's going to be on the field.
And there are no Jets fans there to boo Goodell. This time he'll have the Eagles fans booing him, which I'm sure will go really, really well. Phil, love you, appreciate you, miss you. I hope to get down to Mobile sometime and see you and have some of those Apalachicola oysters down there and maybe some shrimp. Sit out there on the on one of those wharfs and have some fun and soak in the sunshine of the South. But always a pleasure to check in with you. We'll be watching all weekend long, and I'll have my eye on Jordan Willis now. How about that?
All right, Nestor. Be well, and always enjoy our conversations. You and I go back a long time. I appreciate the friendship, and have a great draft this weekend.
I would appreciate the dark chocolate, Phil. That's, I'll send the address. I'll text it to you. Be good, Phil.
We'll get them on dry ice for you. Get them to Baltimore.
It melts in my mouth, not in my hands. We'll see you soon. He is Senior Bowl Phil, Executive Director of the Reese's Senior Bowl, and that's why I'm kidding him about chocolate cups, because when I broadcast from the Mobile Senior Bowl a couple years ago, the Reese's people brought me milk chocolate, and I begged for dark chocolate, and they actually brought me some. So nice people there at Reese's in the peanut butter cup world. ESPN Insiders, XM, Sirius XM, as well as Crimson Tide Radio with Eli Gold. He's our lifer pal, Phil Savage. So there you go. Can't get a more credible look at the Ravens draft or options than we just gave you. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world, including Mobile. If you love football, if you love going on the road with the Ravens, we've got the trips for you. Nashville, Green Bay, Minneapolis, as well as London, all on sale and all $100 off this week and next week. Make the decisions early. If you're 2, you save $200. If you're 4, you save $400. Can't do it any better than that. And we've taken over 18,000 people now on our WNST road trips. We hope that you join us. This is your best road trip lineup I can ever remember, honestly. All these trips are going to be fantastic. And your wife will love the Mall of America in October. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. And during the draft, we will be texting out all of the moves, all of the picks, as we always do. 10,000 of you on it. You know how good it is. It is the WNST text service, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday, getting you ready for the draft as well. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.